right now. Okay, welcome to New Realities. This is a weekly show I've been doing on issues surrounding this next level of reality that we're coming into. A lot of it has to do with higher consciousness, unknown consciousness. And we have a very special guest today, besides our regular group of people, which is Steve Spear, Nadi Hanna, uh, Henrietta Weeks, and Elliot Edge. Elliot, why don't you introduce tonight's special guest,
Um,
and we'll go for it.
well, I'm introducing Tom Campbell to this forum because Tom Campbell, I think, is the most avant-garde scientist and philosopher out there right now, and that is not an easy thing to promote. That is something that, you know, from a very skeptical and, interested position, to find Tom Campbell's work, which is called My Big Toe, and it's over 1,000 pages long, and it's an excellent work of text. It's an excellent theory. To be exposed to this material, especially if you're interested in, anything from like remote viewing to UFO sort of experiences and whatnot. Um, Tom has like laid it out in a wonderful, exciting theory of possibilities. Um, I'm almost done. I'm almost done. I'm almost done.
I oh, no.
It's a 3-volume work. It's one of the most exciting books I've ever read on the paranormal and philosophy in general. And I've been reading that my entire life. Like, I have a background in Zen, and I have a background in like Christian Gnosticism and all these kinds of things. But when I read Tom's book, I immediately jumped on the forum and wanted to know more about him, wanted to meet him, and he was like kind enough to engage my questions and engage my interests. So with that, like, and one last thing before we go over to Tom,
Yeah.
Tom is also like a very serious physicist. He has a background in the DoD. He has a background in Army technical intelligence. He is not a goofball. He is a deep reader of physics and a fascinating man. And I love him with all my heart. So Tom,
Wow.
please take it away.
Before you do that, I just want to tell people that Tom's my big toe is stands for theory of everything.
Theory of everything.
So
Theory of
Tom has
everything.
put together a
A
treatise
massive theory
on how to combine spirit, physics, reality, consciousness, the unconsciousness, everything, and maybe you'll throw in UFOs tonight, okay? And
I
unknown
would
intelligence.
I would love to hear his theory on UFOs, but before we go there, just last but not least, Tom has a massive theory of everything. He has a meta theory of everything, and let's take it to him.
Okay, let's go there, Tom. Thanks for being here. Okay, go for it. You're unmuted, and you can start with your theory of everything if it doesn't take a couple of days or years to explain it, but go ahead.
Well, I can try to do this in fewer words. Typically, when I talk about this, it's like 2 or 3 days long, with 6 hours a day and several days. But we'll try to condense it into something a little shorter for this group.
Yeah.
I'm a physicist. That was my career. That's how I paid mortgages and, bought cars and so on, raised a family, was because of my work in physics. But at the same time, I've been a consciousness researcher for about as many years as I've been a working physicist. Both of those careers started about the same time, which was in about 1971 or two. So that's, a long time. We're talking about, 50 years ago. So in any case, when I was in graduate school working on my PhD, I took an offer, special, inexpensive offer for students to learn how to meditate. And when I did that, I found I was a natural for it. Meditation came very easy for me. It seemed very natural, and I found meditation to be a simple thing to do. 3 months later, we'll fast forward, and I'm using the meditation state in order to debug my software that I'm doing, that I'm using in my PhD thesis. So that was a really big deal, because in those days we're talking about punch cards, and it's not the kind of debugging was not a simple thing in those days. And we're talking about one computer for a whole university, and there were no PCs. And you may have to wait a week after a bomb of your computer code before you could get the next run, and sometimes 2 weeks because you'd get in a long queue. So debugging software was a very serious thing, and very difficult because there was no debugging software that helped you to do that. You just had to figure it out on your own. So being able to do that in my mind much more easily and accurately than I could actually do looking at the printout of the code that I had written, told me that there was another aspect to reality that was not physical. It was mental. There's some other part of reality besides just the physical part. So as a physicist, what I did was model reality. That's what physics does. We model reality. And here I found there's a whole nother piece of reality that I didn't even know existed. And I wanted to know, how does it work? Why does it work? How is it? Where is it? What are its limitations? What can you do with it? So I also, perchance, after I graduated from school, or after I got out of school, I took a job, and one thing led to another, and I ended up meeting Robert Monroe, author of Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys and Ultimate Journey, and actually became part of those books. If you read the second book, Far Journey, you'll find TC Physicist in there. That would be me. So I began working with Bob Monroe, and after a couple of years with Bob, I was able to have out-of-body experiences on demand whenever I wanted to, when I wanted to, and I could do them pretty precisely enough that I could actually start doing research in consciousness. And by that, I mean, we were doing evidential things like remote viewing, healing, things that you could check to see whether or not you were actually having an effect or actually getting the right information. So then what I would do is I would change one of the variables and then do it again, and then change that variable a little more and do it again, and then hold that variable still and change another one. And after 35, 40 years of that, I thought I had done enough research that I understood almost how things work, what you could do, what were the limitations, what couldn't you do, and why? And why did this intuitive channel seem to be flaky? Like sometimes it worked really well and sometimes it didn't work so well. And there's reasons for all of that. So I took all the facts that I had learned about consciousness, and one of those facts, you might think, what's a fact of consciousness? One of those facts is that consciousness is fundamental. Consciousness is fundamental, and everything else is virtual or a product of consciousness.
Well, how do you describe everyone uses that word consciousness. I don't know if anyone has really defined it. How do you define?
I define it.
Okay.
I define it very simply, and that is consciousness is awareness with a choice. It's awareness that makes choices. And I'm talking about, of course, a free will choice, because there is no other kind of choice. If there's no free will, there is no choice. So it's a consciousness that makes a free will choice. And that's it. It's a very simple definition. So it's an awareness. It's an awareness that makes a free will choice, is what I mean to say. So it's just two elements there. It's an awareness, and that's a self-awareness, awareness of self, and inside awareness, and an outside awareness, awareness of other, awareness of the environment that you're operating in, your interaction with other things. You're not alone, in a black void. You interact with other things and stuff. So it's that awareness, and the fact that within that awareness, you have choices, things that you can do or not do. And free will is just simply your ability to choose. Of those choices that you know about, you can make a choice, even if there's more choices you don't know about, and some choices that are limited that you can't make. Doesn't matter. Of just the ones that you can make, you have the free will to choose the one you wish for your own reasons. So that's free will. So that's what consciousness is. Now, consciousness is, I came to the conclusion it was fundamental because I could do things within consciousness that would affect the physical, change the physical, but I couldn't do anything in the physical that would change consciousness or fundamentally affect consciousness. So that shows you that the arrow of causality runs from consciousness to the physical. Okay, so that was just one fact of consciousness. So I end up with this basket of facts of consciousness from my research over years of doing research in consciousness. And I have these facts of the physical world, the objective world, because I'm a physicist. So I got that ball of facts too. And I start looking for a theory, an understanding that would explain all of those facts, all of them. And I not only wanted to explain the objective world, which is required Einstein's what I call little toe, a theory that unifies quantum physics and relativity. And also I wanted to understand and be able to explain the subjective world, because that is really the most important world that we live in, is that subjective world. That's where all the interesting things are. That's where love is. That's where caring is. That's where sharing is. That's where attitude is. That's where your feelings and emotions are. Most all of the parts of your experience that are the most significant all fall in the subjective world, not in the objective world. So it boils down that the objective world is the stage and the props, and the subjective world are the actors and what the actors are doing and thinking and feeling and what their story is. That's the subjective part. And hardly anybody goes to a play to see the props. That's not the important thing. So I come up with this theory of everything that lets me explain why, Susie Q is unhappy and feeling miserable, because that's a subjective state, and also lets me derive from first principles quantum physics and relativity, something that contemporary physics can't do. Contemporary physics sees quantum physics as weird science. It's beyond logic. It doesn't follow the logical rules that all the other physics does. It does things that are just unexplainable and can't be explained according to contemporary physicists. But from my theory, it's easily explainable.
Well, explain it, because no one else has been able to explain it. How do you explain that? The merging of subjective, objective, quantum, Newtonian, all that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. The reason that I explain that, and I explain relativity both. So let me start with relativity, because that's easier. That's simpler.
Okay. Yeah.
Relativity is based fundamentally on one fact, and that is that the speed of light is a constant. If you know the speed of light is a constant, you can just do a little bit of math and come up with some very interesting results of that, like time dilation, length contraction, these sorts of things that are relativity, what can we say, things that are very unusual. You take a clock and you go fly it around at high speeds and bring it back, and you find that it's lost time, because time dilates. And you have all this. And then you have your general relativity, which then adds gravity and just adds more mathematics and a model of space-time. But the fact is that relativity fundamentally is based on this unreasonable fact that sees a constant. See, nothing else has a constant velocity. Everything
but
else, velocity is relative, and I can
but
tell you why.
it's constant to the observer who's observing it. That's the key to relativity, isn't it? If two people are moving at different speeds, talk about that. That kind
Yeah.
of constant.
Well, that's the thing. When light always moves at the same speed. In other words, everything else, if you're in a car and you're going 10 mile an hour and you reach out the window with a ball and you throw a ball 20 mile an hour in the direction of the car, the ball's moving now with 30 mile an hour, the 20 plus 10 relative to the ground, right? So velocities add, and in everything in our world, in our reality, works like that, except one thing, and that's light. With light, you can take a source of light, and no matter what velocity that light's going, if that flashlight's going, say, if you turn it on, the light comes out at the same speed, c. We call it c, the speed of light. So it doesn't matter what the source is doing and how fast it's moving. Light always goes the same speed. And if you ask a physicist, why is that? They'll tell you they have no idea. It's just a fact. It is what it is.
Right.
But now if you see reality as a virtual reality, which I do, it's a reality computed in, it's a reality computed in consciousness. Okay. Consciousness is the computer. And we are pieces of consciousness, and we're the player. And this body is the avatar. So when you have that and you realize that this is a virtual reality, then you know that virtual realities have kind of based on pixels. You have the minimum steps in time and minimum steps in distance. Okay. Well, when you have that, then the fastest that anything can move in a virtual reality is one step of distance for every step of time. That can't go any faster than that without skipping pixels, which is teleporting, disappearing from here and reappearing someplace else. And that's not allowed in our reality. So speed of light is a constant.
So the speed of light and consciousness, there must be a relationship between the two then, right?
Well, the only relationship is that, it is the maximum speed inside this virtual reality. So the relationship between them is this is a virtual reality. It's computed in consciousness. Like all dynamic realities, it has an outer time loop. It has a spatial grid, with pixels, if you will, in 3D, and you can only move. The fastest you can move through it is 1 pixel for every delta t. So that defines that explains why c is a constant. It has to be. And even in any virtual reality, even in the Sims, there is a constant. In that Sims game, you can't move things any faster than one pixel of distance for every time the screen is refreshed.
Okay, well, then go a little deeper and talk about entanglement, where entanglement means, we spin one thing one way and instantly the other thing, other object that's entangled with it is affected.
Entanglement in a virtual reality is a very simple idea. It's an if-then statement. If the electron, you have an electron and its entangled twin. One's a spin up, one's a spin down. So here's you can't see my thumbs. One's a spin up and one's a spin down. And if you flip this one, that one flips.
But that's faster than the speed of light then.
And it's fast. Yeah, this one flips, and on the other side of the universe, that one flips much faster than the speed of light. Well, that's an if-then statement in a simulation. If this one flips, then that one flips. There is no space in a simulation. Space is just computed. You see, there is no space. It's a simulation. So it's a very simple idea. Entanglement becomes trivially easy thing to produce. When you look at the big problem with the double slit experiment is why should particles act like waves? Why should particles going through 2 slits, right, one at a time? Why should those particles arrange themselves on a screen behind those slits in an interference pattern when there's no interference? It's just one particle by itself, but they arrange themselves in an interference pattern. And that's because the way this virtual reality works is that the rendering engine for it, when it goes to render an unknown, like a new experiment, what's the result? It takes a random draw from a probability distribution of the possibilities. And that is what you get. And in that case, the probability distribution had to look like an interference pattern. Otherwise, the reality would have had a discrepancy. It would have had a kind of a logical violation of itself, because we had the science of optics, which put many photons at those two slits, said that they were a wave, and got interference between the two slits. Well, we know photons don't interact with each other. So whether you send one through or a million through, you should get the same result. They don't interact with each other. Each one is like it's by itself. So you see, that would have been a logical inconsistency. So the system had to use the probability distribution of an interference pattern when it did its selection of the probability of the probability distribution of the possibilities. It couldn't do anything else. Mm-hmm. So that's why quantum physics is such that it describes particles as probability distributions, because that's what they are inherently. They are nothing other than probability distributions, because our reality is not a bottoms up, start with little particles, build up atoms, build up molecules, build up the world. It doesn't work that way. You have a rule set that does that sort of calculation, but our model, our reality is modeled from the top down with statistics and probability. So that's why when you do quantum physics, particles are modeled as probability distributions. If you model them as little chunks of matter, you can't get the right answer. You only get the right answer when you assume they're probability distributions, because that is exactly what they are. That's how it's modeled.
So you're saying reality itself is a probability event. It's not a actual event. It's always being in flux.
It's always in flux. I have this database, and I can explain you why the system has to have this database. It's called the future probability distribution, and that is, there is a probability associated with everything that can happen, and there's a probability, that it will happen. So that's the future probability distribution. That's required by the rendering engine, because the rendering engine has to have that distribution in order to draw that random draw from the probability distribution, of the possibilities. So it needs that information.
Right.
So when you have that database, then you can, that is the, that's the fundamental driver here. So yes, everything that can happen is possible, but what does happen isn't always what's most probable, but it's at least something that's possible according to the rule set that defines the virtual reality.
So let me ask you, because the topic of this room has been about unknown intelligences, is it possible with superior awareness of consciousness to manipulate time and space if you know the rules of the game? I mean, now we don't.
May I add to this?
Yes, please. Yes.
Is that please. Tom is two things. Tom, I think, has the best theory out there, and that is not easy for me to say. I am super skeptical. But the idea of Tom's got this great idea where it's does the universe need to be as big as it is? Does it seem that big? Maybe that's something that we need to get this vastness of space that we can't conquer. But Tom, I would love to hear you, because I'm obsessed with UFOs and alien intelligences and things like that. And I would love to get and you doing your out of body work. I mean, I would love to hear you talk about non-human. And
yes, non-human. Okay. Thanks, Tom. If you could.
All right, I can talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that Elliot was referring to was the Fermi paradox. And there's really two directions I'd like to come from to talk about aliens and possibilities of others on other worlds. And one of them, and they come from actually opposite positions, but one of them is the Fermi paradox. The Fermi paradox was created by Enrico Fermi, who, sitting around over lunch with his other physicist friends, started to talk about extraterrestrials. And they started to do a little calculation. Okay, given that we are in kind of the middle age of the universe. You had the universe, and it became the universe at this time, and then 5 billion years later, we come along. Our part of the universe developed, and another billion years, other parts of the universe. So the universe didn't just poof, was the whole universe all at once. It started and grew and became and evolved over time. And we're kind of in the middle of that time right now. If we look at the whole universe, about half of it is younger than us, and the other half is older than us. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there's billions of years between that older part and us. This isn't a fast process. All right, so the idea was that given, even if ETs, existed out there somewhere in that older part of the universe, because they got a faster start. They were 2 billion years ahead of us as far as their evolution went. Mm-hmm. And if they were limited to traveling slower than the speed of light, they just couldn't break that barrier. And if their populations grew like we understand populations grow, we have equations that say, given certain variables, populations will grow like this, and then the carrying capacity of whatever they're on, whether it's a forest for a bunch of deer or whatever, they kind of meet the carrying capacity, and then they have to reduce their. Anyway, we've done all that kind of math, so we know how that works for humans. So they factored that in and said, if in this older part of the universe, something had started evolving sort of like we evolved, then it was a couple of billion years ahead of us, even at less than the speed of light, given that they would expand populations to the point they had to move on. Their technology got to the point that, they could do interplanet, they could move around at least in their solar system and so on, because after all, their technology now is almost 2 billion years advanced of our technology because they started earlier. So we give them that, and they computed, starting from the center of the old part of the universe, they should have been through our part of the universe just by having to expand, because population and resources were pushing them to expand a long, long time ago.
But Tom, they were there just when Fermi was putting out that paradox, the 1952 flyover of the Capitol. Fermi scientists, the theories of scientific revolution, Thomas Kuhn. Most of these scientists are really stuck in their belief system. You could look at Neil deGrasse Tyson saying, well, those UAPs are artifacts. So I don't buy the Fermi paradox because Fermi missed the boat and the ship.
I kind of want to cut in here. If you don't mind me.
Please. Yes.
The thing, what I really like about Tom's model is that he has a very deep understanding of like psi phenomenon and how psi phenomenon just kind of like encourages consciousness growth. So I can read the entire Washington sighting moment as an opportunity for consciousness growth, for human consciousness growth. And hold on, I'm almost done. And the other thing is that I would like to hear Tom's answer on this, but he's got such an expansive and creative and actually deep model where I'm do we even need a more species? Is it just this planet? Is it just this planet being encouraged time after time, episode after episode, to do things? Because I don't think Tom's model actually requires an entire universe. It can explain the entire universe.
I just want to say I'm not arguing with Tom. I love your intelligence. I just think Fermi, and if we can't compare the rest of the universe to how humans behave either, because we're kind of a strange species. So
I agree with you. Tom. I agree with you on that. And I'm going to go from two different directions. I said in the beginning, well, here's the one direction. Okay. We're going to go Fermi's direction first and see where that leads us. And where that goes and kind of solve that paradox. We're going to solve that paradox, and then, or at least offer up a solution for it. And then I'm going to start at the other end, assuming that all of the people that we know of who have interacted, with things not from here, people, things, whatever, that is not that these people are all delusional. These people are seeing real things and are having real connections, so we, the idea that everybody who sees something that isn't standard must be delusional, to me, that's delusional. It's not like that. You have to understand that for the most part, people are honest people. And if only one person, out of 100 million ever saw anything unusual, well, you could discount it. But we're talking about, millions of people who see things that are unusual.
Thank you.
So I'm going to come from it from both directions. So we're just starting with the Fermi thing. So anyway, Fermi said, well, then where are they? We should be able to see them. They should have moved through here with the idea that everything possibly inhabited would be inhabited, because they're being pushed basically by numbers and resources. So they would be on every possible inhabitable thing. The moon would be full of them, we would know about them, everything. And because we share the same universe, we share the same periodic table, we share the same physics to some extent. Now, there's more physics that we haven't figured out yet, obviously. They may have a lot of physics we don't understand, but to some extent, we share the same physics in as much as we're like electromagnetics and gravitation and things like that are shared. So he said, if they moved through here and everything would be inhabitable that could be inhabited, we'd have to be able to notice them, because there'd be some signature. They couldn't leave no signature. There'd have to be electromagnetic signatures. There'd have to be optical signatures that would it's just impossible that this area was crowded to the point that they had to move on and we wouldn't notice them, because, they have to deal with energy just like we do. They'd leave a footprint in the sand somehow that we would have noticed. So that is considered in science to be a very strong statement. Fermi's paradox is a very strong logical paradox. And there's been about 20 different people try to say why, and so far all of those have been considered weaker explanations than the paradox is strong. But I would offer you another possible explanation. And that is that this is a virtual reality. And if you have a virtual reality, you have to consider that the reality only exists in the minds of the players, right? That is a virtual reality. That's the way they work. So we get a data stream from the consciousness system, and we interpret that as this reality. And it doesn't just compute nothing. It only computes things that it sends to somebody, right? So it exists in the minds of the players. Now, how many players does the system need? So the system has these players, these individual units of consciousness. And when you have just one or two, well, that's really not enough to understand what we can build together with groups, what we could build if we were cooperative, if we were caring, if we, could grow into becoming love. What could we develop? Well, 2 or 3 isn't enough. You need more. But someplace down the line, you get to a point where you really don't need it anymore, because every time you put another individual unit of consciousness in a virtual reality, there's overhead. You got to send them data streams. You have to compute how they're interacting and what they're doing and how they affect everybody else. So you get to the point where there's enough seats in the simulator and you don't need any more seats in the simulator. Now, the big reason that most of science think there must be life out there someplace is because, wow, look at all those trillions of suns. I don't know how many trillions, but there's trillions and trillions of suns out there. And surely some of those have planets that are inhabitable like ours. We couldn't be in all those trillions of suns. Our little sun couldn't be the only one that happened to have, an Earth and a life. That surely there's more. Well, in a virtual reality, the only thing that's computed is what goes to people, what people see. So it's possible that Earth is it. Because if this is the virtual reality, then data streams go to 7.5, right? Actually more than that, about 7.8 billion people get data streams. That's it.
I couldn't agree more, and that's the thing I've been thinking about a lot. Yeah. Steve is desperate to make a comment.
Wait,
Steve,
why is there a limit?
I'm not desperate, Elliot. I'll stay.
Why is there a limit on data streams, and why do we think?
Because why do you need that many?
Well, it's not about need. Why do you need 7 billion? Why do you need 10? I mean, it just is. It just
the reason there's a limit is because the consciousness system is not infinite. It's not perfect. It's not complete. It's still evolving. In other words, it's a real system. And because of that, it has only a certain amount of resources. And eventually adding another seat is more expensive than the amount of effort it takes to feed that seat.
I think there's an unlimited budget, and because it's an open system.
Oh, no.
It's only can be unlimited if it's infinite.
Well, okay,
Yeah,
but so
nothing real can be infinite.
So then talk about the other angle where all these people are seeing things that doesn't.
Hold on. If I may interject, Steve wants to say something. I would love to hear Steve. I haven't seen Steve in a long time.
And then everyone else can jump into. I don't want to hog the mic either.
Tom, when you talk about virtual realities, I was an early VR guy, one of the first modelers in 3D stuff. I did the first virtual reality thing in New York City in 1990, worked with Autodesk. And so I have an idea about virtual realities too. And I'm just curious when I hear you kind of bring that up, and just needed to say that.
I just don't know why there's a limit, Tom, on the data streams, why there should be.
Well, the logic is this way, is that the conscious system is not supernatural. It's not God in a supernatural sense. It's not perfect. It's not, everything. It's not done. It's a real system. And anything real cannot be infinite. Infinity is a concept. It's not something that you can actualize. So being a real system, it has limits on its resources. It's certain, it has limits on the amount of bits it has available.
Yeah.
And eventually it has to feed every new piece of consciousness. It has to feed them a data stream. It has to calculate what's going on. It has to do all that. So it costs overhead to maintain another individual.
I don't think we know the capacity of the system, though. How could we know it from a very limited point of view?
All computational systems are limited.
Yeah,
they're all limited.
We don't know the limit, but the limit doesn't matter. All I'm saying is that any system that's finite will have limits, and there will be some curve where you get the sweet point where that says that, okay, up until that point, I can add more people, and I get more benefit than what it costs. And then you get to a point where the cost starts to get higher than the benefit. And any system, this is just basically systems logic. Any system that's finite, that's real, has that. You guys can't just keep adding things, to infinity. Real systems can't do that. So that's why there's a limit. So in that sense, you'd say all of those lights in the sky, when the big telescope Hubble looks up there, okay, well, the system is sending information to those scientists and their cameras and stuff, and they get a picture of it. And as soon as they look the other way, none of that's being computed anymore, because the only thing that's computed is the data stream going to each individual. And that there really isn't much.
Someone else on another star is looking at that's being computed.
Right. If somebody else is on some other star, some other place, then you have to compute that for them.
Right.
You see?
Over time, would you say render instead of compute?
Yeah.
Render.
Right.
Render is fine. Yeah. The computer is what I'm calling the rendering engine is
what about the people that you acknowledge that are seeing? Yeah. Go there.
Right. Let's start from the opposite end. So,
great. Thank you.
So this end, Fermi paradox says if it's a virtual reality, then maybe that's why they're not here, because we may be the only people. Now, on the other end, we have the larger consciousness system. And this larger consciousness system is is the source, and we are just pieces of it. Okay, we're just chunks of that system. So it just takes a little chunk of itself, separates it from itself, gives it free will, and that's us. All right. Now, the whole point of this system is for the entropy of the system to decrease. Now, let me talk about that just an instant. And that is that if you have an information system and all the bits are random, well, then there's no information in it because all the bits are random. You get information by ordering some of the bits and giving them meaning, giving them significance of some sort. Now you have structure, and that lowers entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder, right? So all things random, high entropy, you get order, you get information, it's lower entropy. So an information system evolves to create information, lower entropy. Now, it turns out that consciousness is a social system because we have all these little individuated units of consciousness interacting with each other and with the source. And a social system lowers its entropy through cooperation and caring and working together. That's how a social system lowers its entropy. So we have the consciousness system that evolves by lowering entropy. Consciousness becomes a social system. So consciousness evolves by becoming love, by becoming caring, by the individuals becoming cooperative, because we can make more together than we can do individually, right? So that leads us, to the point that as we evolve, we individuated units of consciousness, as we evolve, as we become more cooperative and caring and get rid of our fear, right? We become more love-like. We evolve the quality of our consciousness, or in other words, we lower our entropy, okay? So this is what we're here to do. And the reason we have this simulation called the universe is because we can interact here with a lot more significance, we have a lot more, what's the word? Important interactions with consequences, life and death consequences here. Whereas if we're just consciousness in some big chat room someplace talking to each other, there's not very many consequences. So learning, and the way we learn and grow, is by making choices. And if we make those choices for fear, then we end up de-evolving. We make them for love and caring, we end up evolving. So this virtual reality is created with a rule set and initial conditions. And here's the rule set. It's an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness. Okay, so that's really the model, and that's what's going on. Now, our success at growing up is also the system's success because we're a part of it, right? We're just pieces of that system. So its evolution, in part, its strategy for its own evolution is us, our evolution. As we grow up, it grows up because we're a part of that system.
I really love that.
Because of that, it wants to help us. It wants to aid us in our growing up. So we get this simulator that helps us grow up faster because it gives us more ethical choices, more meaningful choices. And it feeds us information. It provides us with synchronicities. Things happen to us that wake us up, that open our mind. For instance, here's a big mind opener that the system produces, crop circles. Okay, so we look at the crop circles. Now, crop circles, show up overnight in the dark, and poof, there they are, and they cover, 30 acres of land with such detailed shapes and figures, sort of like the thing behind Nadia there, behind her head, really complex shapes that 100 surveyors, working for 3 months probably couldn't reproduce that, but this happens overnight in the dark. So what is that? Now, people immediately would say, well, if it's not us, then it must be ETs. Well, I would say that is obviously not us. It's the larger consciousness system trying to wake us up, pry our minds open a little bit, get us to think out of the box, not just get stuck in this materialistic fog that we're in. And the larger consciousness system does that All sorts of things happen to people. Matter of fact, most of the people who are interested in paranormal things, it's because they had a paranormal experience that they couldn't explain. That's what makes them interested in it. And when you just poll the population, you'll find out that something like 75 to 80% of the people have experienced something paranormal. So it's not like that only happens, in really rare events. It happens in the majority of people. Okay. So the system would like to help us open our mind, get out of the rut that we're stuck in with our materialistic mindset. So it does things like crop circles. And, like a lady I was talking with some time ago, her mother died. And like 3 days later, the phone rang and she picks up the phone and it's her mother. And the mother says, well, called her something like, Pookie. Hey, Pookie, I just want to let you know that I'm doing fine and everything's okay. And the daughter was so, whatever, she slams the phone down, because she don't know what to do. And then she's sorry because she just hung up on her mother, Well, how could that happen? Well, if you look at that, you'll see that there's a story there. That lady had her mind opened up. The system took that opportunity because she was ready. That was something she was thinking about. Now she gets interested and becomes a seeker. She starts looking for bigger pictures. She starts saying what's important and what's not. This material world is not the whole world. So it opens people's minds. So people see ETs. And let's say you have, 5 guys and they're all out on the veranda at a party someplace, and they're all sitting out there, and sure enough, there's lights coming out in the sky, and they see them, and they all come flying over, and then they stop and they hover, and then, there's no noise, it's soundless, and then, maybe one of them comes down and lands and maybe takes off again, and they go out and they find little burnt marks in the grass, and, they do all that, and all 5 of them seen the same thing. Well, doesn't that prove that every one of those, their reality is a data stream. They're getting a data stream from consciousness, and all 5 of them are getting those UFOs in their data stream. And do they see them? Yes. And are they real? Yes, because there's nothing more real than information.
Tom, not to interrupt, but I really think that this is an important point, is that we always talk about the sci factor and the paranormal factor. And it seems like the paranormal factor just kind of injects a level of novelty where you jump out of your normal day-to-day stuff.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So why would the system do that? Why would the larger consciousness system put that in people's data streams? Well, for the same reason. It opens their mind. It gets
let me
a
ask
bigger
Nadi,
picture.
who studied crop. Nadi, you have any comments on the crop circle opening mind theory of Tom Campbell?
Tom, it's awesome to hear you just listen and take it all in. I was thinking about that because, Tom, last week we got to just flip out on crop circles, and we had a slideshow coming out, and I think I'm just so tickled to hear your theory about the activation of consciousness that they, can create. I mean, and certainly they are the reflector of consciousness, and they're open to interpretation. So you can see whatever you want to see in it. I guess it's a data stream, right, of how we see it. And I could wax poetic on and on for the crop circles, but I'm curious. I might have missed it it's possible I missed it. But so who are the VR? Who's the programmers?
Okay.
Consciousness.
It's a real good question. The programmers. This virtual reality was not programmed. This virtual reality evolved. And we do that in our computer science departments now in universities. We can evolve simple, virtual realities. And what you need is a set of initial conditions, and you need a rule set. The rule set defines how those initial conditions can change with time. So you set all this up. Here's your initial conditions. Here's your rule set. It's in the computer. You hit the run button, and those initial conditions start to change according to the rule set. Now, what were those initial conditions? Well, it was a ball of plasma, very tight, small ball of plasma, very high temperatures, very high pressures. And, you realize this is the Big Bang, right? But really it's the big digital bang. And what's the rule set? The rule set is basic physics. It's the rules of this virtual reality. It's science. What scientists do is they try to figure out what the rules are, what the rules in the rule set are. That's the job of science. So the run button is hit, that ball of plasma expands. As it expands, it cools. You end up with suns, you end up with planets, you end up with us. It's all part of evolution. So this virtual reality evolved. It's a digital virtual reality. See, it's virtual. It's a digital thing. It evolved in a computer. It makes sense. What's the computer? Consciousness is the computer. Consciousness is an information system. It configures part of itself as a computer, which is the server and the rendering engine. It configures part of itself as individuated units of consciousness, like us, and part of itself as like the operating system. The bigger picture that kind of orchestrates everything else. So that's just consciousness. So it's not programmed. It's evolved. So it was evolved just to create a virtual reality for us as a entropy reduction trainer, because it had more interesting and more important choices than we had otherwise, just sitting around chatting with each other, within a consciousness system. Well, go ahead, Steve.
I know you want to. Oh, okay. All right, fine.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go, Nadi.
Go ahead, Nadia.
Okay, so just quickly, so back to the crop circles and communication from advanced civilizations. So they are part of our collective consciousness. It's all part of the design. It's
all part of a design, all part of the larger consciousness system, all part of a system trying to give us an optimal opportunity to grow up by giving us choices, by helping us open our eyes, by helping us see bigger pictures. Okay, so a crop circle provides a bigger picture. All right.
Well, don't we do that for each other too? Like we're all agents?
Not as much as the crop.
Yeah, I think we do. Someone comes into our field, they give us a new idea, they wake us up.
Sure,
exactly.
Sure.
We do that for each other, and we all experience things that are hard to explain. Well, I shouldn't say all, but most of us do. Most of us will have an event where we remote view something, we telepathically get information, we just suddenly, and what do we call that? We call that intuition. We just get knowledge, we just get information, and it's not rational, it's not logical, it's beyond logic. You just get it and you know it, you see, and that's our intuitive side. And our intuitive side is part of our consciousness. Our consciousness has two paths. One's an intellectual path, one's an intuitive path. And, here we are. And yes, we feed each other in our intuitive paths. Where does most of the art come from? Where do most of the stories in our literature come from? They are intuitive. People, they just come to people out of nowhere. It's intuition. So yeah, we feed each other and open each other's minds. That's part of it. But the system wants us to succeed because our success is its success. So it does what it can. It gives this lady her mother on the phone just to open her mind. It gives somebody else a premonition that says, don't go home the usual way. You need to go home the long route today. Really, you need to do that. And the person does that, and they find out they missed this huge accident, with a 50-car pileup had they gone back their way. And that was just intuition. Well, it's not that rare. A lot of people get that.
Tom. I'm gonna hop into it. So it seems very deterministic. It's a rules-based system. It sounds like it's just like an amped up game of life, with the simple rules. If there's a dot next to two dots, then it forms a dot above it. You remember life, of course,
sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just from an outside perspective, which I'm an outsider. I see that, I'm seeing your theory is like a kind of amped up life game, rule-based system, closed system, deterministic system with glitches in the kind of matrix, and those glitches I would see as the intuitive or the kind of code that's kind of rotted that creates this intuitive or these blips in the matrix. But just talk about determinism. I'm also gonna ask you about harmony really quick, the tyranny of the stars, and Gnosticism. If you can jump into a little Gnosticism.
Okay. Well, let me talk about determinism first. My system is not at all deterministic. There's two opposite ends in philosophy. Well, there's more, but at least as far as cosmology goes, on one end, you have determinists and materialists. If you're a materialist, you have to be a determinist. Those two go with each other. And if you're a materialist and a determinist, you have to say that consciousness, time, and free will are all illusions. They don't exist. The opposite end of that is consciousness, time, and free will exist, and they're fundamental, and materialism and determinism are illusions. You see, these two opposite corners are totally incompatible with each other. Now, I'm in that corner with consciousness and free will, and time existing, and that determinism and materialism are illusions. They don't really exist at all. And here's why. It sounds like it's deterministic because I set a rule set. But what happens is it's not rational for a system to compute a virtual reality from the ground up. That is, start with particles and build up bigger things, particles to atoms, to molecules, to what's going on here. Way too much computation, just not practical thing to do. Pretty much impossible to do that.
Well, Tom, there's not, wait. The idea that there's not enough computation is kind of you're just throwing that out there. There is enough. There will be enough.
I actually have to disagree, even as like a non-physicist or a non-scientist. It's like all computers have a fucking limit.
Okay, well, let me just say this. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's impractical. It's not good computer science because you can solve the problem from another direction that gives you everything you'd get from that direction at a billionth of the cost in computer science. So it's just a more intelligent way to solve the problem. Now, that way is that you have this rule set at the bottom that defines how we evolve. But now that rule set computes probability distributions about what happens up in the macro world, up in the molecules and the stuff that we interact with. Okay, instead of saying, oh, this molecule bumps into that molecule, that's why that molecule does what it does. That's the deterministic grounds up. It says that up here at a higher level is that, well, a lot of things could possibly happen. And here's a probability distribution of the possibilities of the things that could happen. Okay, now, what happens next? It's not a deterministic calculation based on what happened before. It's a random draw from the probability distribution of the possibilities. In other words, a scientist gets his big microscope or a big telescope and he looks out at the stars, and it's a telescope that can see much further than any telescope has ever seen before. So it's going to be something new coming in here, new information coming into the reality. What does he see? Well, the system says, well, there's probably 10,000 things he could see. And the system has to say that they're consistent. You don't want things that are inconsistent. So, and there's a probability that he sees, each one of these 10,000 things has a probability. So when he turns on his telescope and he clicks his button to take the picture, the system takes a random draw from the distribution, probability distribution of probabilities, and that's what he sees. You see? That's the alternative to calculating deterministically from the ground up. You end up with a probability-derived world that is worked from probability distributions. You dig a hole in the ground. Nobody knows what's inside that hole. Maybe just dirt, maybe rocks, maybe old dinosaur bones, maybe a Spanish doubloon. Who knows what's under that ground? You dig it up, you move the dirt, and the system takes a random draw from the probability distribution of all the possibilities, and that's what's in the hole.
Tom,
you open
Tom,
your, go ahead.
Are you familiar with memoristas?
With what?
Memorista. A memorista.
No.
It's the new component. Wait, this is important, Alan. It's
Okay.
the new electrical component, a memristor.
He's not
MEMRISTOR. It's the
No, I'm not
first.
familiar with that name.
Okay, it's
But-
a new electrical component. The first one in the first 50 years, transistors, resistors, and that brings in a whole new level of novelty that maybe Elliot was talking about into the system, and the idea about what brings novelty to the system.
But
Oh
anyway,
no.
oh no,
Go
I
on.
just want to get back to the idea. Yeah, I agree that the universe is always trying to wake us up by anomalies or novelty, as Terence McKenna would say.
Mhm.
But that doesn't discount the fact that you and I also exist as aspects of consciousness, and maybe other beings and other worlds also exist as aspects of consciousness. What do you say about that?
Well, I don't have.
I'm just curious.
My model is just a model of reality. Okay, I
Right.
don't say this is the answer and that's not. That's that's
Yeah,
not
I get
rational.
that. I
That's
get
not
that,
rational. Okay.
Yeah,
So
okay,
in
I
this
get it.
in this model, what it says is that it's possible that there's just us, that we have, there's enough of us. Anymore we don't need. Now there's other reality frames. We're not the only universe. There's
Right.
other universes and other reality frames going on here too. But just our universe and our reality frame, okay, so it may have other entities in it growing up and evolving in other places. There's no reason why that can't happen. It isn't necessary to the model. It isn't, so yeah, all those things are possible. So my model just points out, like the Fermi paradox, that could be a solution to it, is that all the rest is just lights in the sky. When that guy turns off his telescope, none of that gets done anymore. The only things that get done are the players. And if there's 7.5 billion players and they get the data stream, then that's it. There isn't a universe full of trillions of suns. There's only what you look at. And as soon as you stop looking at it, it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore because it never really existed. It only is, the reality's only in the minds of the players. You see, there is no reality out there. It's virtual. It's just information. The reality is only in the minds of the players. So there is no universe.
Right.
There is no physical place. There's just us,
Tom, relate that to
consciousness.
Schrodinger's cat. Relate that to Schrodinger's cat. Can you throw that in
Okay.
there?
Yeah, I can. I just put up an explanation of Schrodinger's cat a couple of weeks ago.
I'm sure you did.
It's a really simple thing to solve. It's not that hard at all. You put a cat in a box, right? And well, we may even look at it as putting 100 cats in boxes, all at the same time. You can do it that way, and then that'll make it maybe a little simpler. And then you have a radioactive device in there that spits out a particle every once in a while. And if that particle happens to hit this sensor, this Geiger counter, then poison will be released and kill the cat. That's basically the idea of Schrodinger's cat. Now, the quantum physicists today that really don't understand quantum physics, they see that their cat is both dead and alive. And that sounds kind of ridiculous. It's dead and alive. It's a superposition of the possibilities. It's in a quantum superposition. So the cat's dead, the cat's alive, and you won't know until you make a measurement. When you open the door and look, then you'll find out which one it is. But it's simpler than that. What happens, it's just statistics. So that cat doesn't exist. There is no cat. There is no box. All of this is information that's given to us. So in this information, the way the system works, the way the rendering engine feeds us, is when we go to open that box of those 100 cats there, we'll say, let's open box number 75. We pull open the door, and at that moment, we're looking for something, for information that we don't know. What happens? Well, we look at the probability distribution. The probability distribution for that cat being a dead or alive at exactly that moment. And that's easy to calculate because, so many particles come out per second from the radioactive source. There's so much area, and the Geiger counter only takes up some fraction of that area. So you look at the probability, but there's possibilities that it might have hit it on the very first particle. It may not hit it until the millionth particle. Those are probable, but there's some probability distribution over that, you see? And it takes a random draw, and that then is what it renders. In the data stream it sends to that experimenter, the cat's either dead or the cat's alive because of the random draw from the probability distribution of the possibilities. So that's how that works. And the probabilities are easy to calculate, and you get a whole distribution. You can say, well, that the cat's dead, may be, 1 in 1,000 because it's only been 10 seconds after the experiment started. An hour after the experiment started.
I just want to say I have to jump off, but keep the conversation going as long. I made Henrietta the co-host. Thank you, Tom, for being here, but continue because I think Elliot has a lot more to add, and Henrietta and Nadi.
Well,
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I want to.
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah. The only thing I wanted to throw out is when you discover like there's nothing out there, we keep discovering more things. Is that just to wake us up to more of consciousness?
No, it's all a simulation. It's all fake.
It's a simulation.
Wait,
so as we look more, you see, as we look, you get a result when you make a measurement. Mm-hmm. So you make a measurement like with a telescope or anything else by opening up a box door with a cat inside. You're making a measurement, or opening your refrigerator door after you've been gone for a month, and you don't know what's inside. When you make a measurement, the system has to put something there. Mm-hmm. You can't just have a black hole. And what it puts there is that random draw from the probability distribution of the possibilities. That's how our reality goes on. So we discover new things.
All right. Henrietta had a question.
Yeah, I know, but I just want to say, go back to random draw eventually.
Yeah, but Steve, let Henrietta jump in. Steve, go. Henrietta, go ahead. Henrietta.
No, I was just so I've been thinking about a few things as you've been speaking about the larger consciousness system, and I understand exactly. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and it seems to be what could well be going on. But when I think about the incredible complexity of biological life, and then all biological life, and then when you just say, well, Elliot said, it's all a simulation. Like, I'm just curious, like, how can one be so certain? That's a very kind of certain statement. Because in terms of your theory, like the complexity of biological life, does that all fit in with everything you're saying?
Yes, the complexity of biological life comes because it evolved. Evolution creates very complex things. You see, if somebody had to sit down and program it, it would be a monster. It would be almost impossible. Right. But if you just let stuff evolve, you start with simple things. And those simple things get more complex, and they make more things that are more complex. We start with a single cell, and then you get double cells, and then eventually you get human beings. And then all the different, let's just say, these sort of emotional, intelligent body of, say, plants and animals. Like, how does that's all part of this evolution of the system, the larger consciousness. Exactly. It's all part of the evolution of the system. It's just evolved to be that way. And yes, the animals and so on, and the bumblebees are conscious. Yeah. They have consciousness as well.
And then the blind watchmaker. But I'll
right. That's it. Well, yeah, no, but I also just wanted to circle back to when you said, that love and cooperation is the kind of the motivation, the system that needs us to. So in terms of kind of these extraordinary emotional capacities that we have, as well as other animals, mammals, and etc., and then these experiences like the abduction experience, which is all of that, you're saying is just part, is not just, but it's just it's a growth.
It's all.
That's what it's for.
Yeah, it's all part of the same system. That's what it's for. It's an experience. In those experiences, you have choices. Whether it's an abduction experience or anything, you have choices, and you have experiences. And by the quality of your choices within those experiences, like, does that experience create a lot of fear? And does that fear make you, go into yourself and stop communicating? And you have choices in how you deal with every experience that you have. And by those choices, you evolve. So this life just gives us opportunities to make choices relative to our experiences. And that's how we evolve. If we make choices toward love and toward caring, toward cooperation, then we evolve. If we make choices toward fear, then we de-evolve.
And the whole system evolves
the
and
whole
changes.
system evolves and changes.
So that's
exactly.
everything.
And as far as me being so certain, I will tell you, this is a model. This is not a certainty. This is a model. This is an explanation. You look at all the data and you say, well, here is one explanation that explains quantum mechanics and relativity and aliens and paranormal things. And here's one thing that explains everything in pretty much detail, like that. We talk about getting data out of databases and the Akashic records and so on. Well, this model says that has to occur because you need that database. The reason that you have those records out there in that database is it's required for the rendering engine to do what it has to do. You need that probability distribution, of the possible future, which then as time goes by becomes a past, a distribution of everything that could have happened and the probability that it would have, in the past. So you have all this data that's generated because the system needs it to render the virtual reality, and we're consciousness, so we can get that information. So there's no mystical Akashic records. It's just part of the process. It's required. It's
Nadi asked a question about Akashic records in the chat, so maybe Nadi wants to talk about it. Ask Tom about Akashic records. Nadi?
You're speaking to it. My curiosity was, with Schrodinger's cat, right? The poor cat, by the way.
I agree.
It just got me thinking, with the both cats both dead and alive. Well, somewhere in a parallel reality, there's a cat that's alive, there's a cat that's dead, and if there is no such thing as fiction, everything we can think of, absolutely exists in the Akash. But then it also fits exactly what you're saying. But Henrietta, I appreciate, it's bringing it all together in terms of understanding the probabilities, which is it's so mind blowing. It's so infinite. Really.
And see, when you look at it one way, there's this thing called many worlds. Okay. And that would say that every time a change takes place, another universe goes off with that change in it. So all the things that could possibly happen are all acted out in one of these many worlds. Well, that is a very difficult thing to do because every one of those new worlds is spinning off new worlds and spinning off new worlds, and it becomes very impractical. So that's not really a rational choice, but you get the same result by having everything in probability, not in new worlds and new universes. You have everything that could possibly happen, you see, and the probability that it might. So it's all there. And then we make choices. And as we make choices, we actualize, what actually does happen here. And that's just a thread running through this database is the stuff we actually have the choices. But all this other stuff is sitting out there, not in terms of, infinite numbers of universes, but just in terms of probability. And that database, then you can get into it. You can get from it. That's what your intuition does.
Tom, so J.G. Bennett and the Gurdjieff's potentialities and actualities, and pulling the actuality out of the pool of potentialities, the kind of Hyle, the Greek Hyle, right? You familiar with that? H-Y-L-E. What?
Yeah, that's what we're doing. By making choices, we're actualizing what's potential.
Right. So just I have to bring this in that you keep talking about choices, but you don't really mention chance. You do in some regard. I'm just going to say one thing and then I'll stop and I'll let you speak. That choices are ego-driven and chance is letting it go. You know what I mean? So you keep saying choice, and that makes me think, okay, this is an ego-driven system where everybody's making choices, and there's a chance element to it. We're just letting it go and not choosing and letting. So go ahead. I'll let you go with that.
Okay. Well, where that's coming, I can kind of address that in something we haven't talked about yet. And that's the reason we're here, I said, is to evolve, to grow up, right? And the two opposite sides are love and fear. Okay, now what is ego? Ego is awareness in the service of fear. And what are we here to do? We're here to get rid of that fear and become love. And as we do that, we also get rid of that ego. Ego is awareness in the service of fear. Okay, and Freud had something he called superego, which roughly turns into awareness in the service of love. And that's different. So now where chance comes into mind as I talk about probability, that's chance. But what you're talking about is growing up, letting go of the ego. So as you become love, as you let go of fear, you also let go of ego. And besides ego, that other bad thing that we want to get rid of, besides ego, are beliefs. We don't want to believe things because beliefs are limiting. Every time you have a belief, it limits you because you throw away information that's contrary to your belief. So the enemies, are, if you will, is fear, which is the main thing. Fear creates both ego and belief. Most of our beliefs are there because they're part of our ego and part of our fear. So that's kind of the dynamic. And yes, you're right. Most people make choices with their ego. That's why it takes so long for us to grow up, because we have to realize that that isn't helpful. That's our fear part. And those choices are mostly not good choices. That's why most of us are constantly in a stew and live in a soap opera, because we make so many choices based on our fear and our ego and our beliefs.
Tom, can I ask you a question about fear though? Because isn't there I totally understand what you're saying about awareness in the service of fear as being not helpful to the system growing, but isn't there a function of fear which is helpful? I mean, it is kind of a growth tool in its own way, in terms of your responses to protect yourself, your family, but also that experience which we've all had of sort of being afraid but doing something anyway, and then learning something from that.
Yeah, well, that's getting over fear. When you're afraid but you do it anyway, that's you overcoming fear. But no, there is no value to fear, but we think there is, and here's the difference. Okay, here's the difference. We think that fear sometimes keeps us from doing things that we shouldn't do, and let's say take a walk in the woods. When the grizzly bears are out mating, bad idea, right? And what keeps you out of the woods is that fear of those grizzly bears. No, that isn't what keeps you out of the woods. What keeps you out of the woods is that you're an intelligent person and you realize that there's danger there, and you don't go in the woods unless you really have to. But because you're an intelligent person, if you do have to, then you read up on it and should you look at them in the eye or should you look down? Do you have your air horn and your pepper spray and all the stuff that might be helpful to you? So you prepare for it if you have to go, but you don't go because you're smart enough to know that's not a good idea. So it's not the fear that keeps you out of the woods. It's your intelligence. It's your rational part is what keeps you out of the woods. The fear makes it such that you make yourself bear bait with your fear, because if you're frightened and you're in the woods, the bear smells that. It's a predator. It smells your fear. That attracts it. If you're fearful, you run. That's like a predator. The bear will chase you and get you. So fear is all counterproductive. If you're fearless, you will do the right thing. So the reason you don't jump off a cliff isn't because fear saves you from doing it. It's because your good sense saves you from doing it. You see?
Yeah.
And the fact that you have fear may make you fall off that cliff because you get real close to the edge and you're fearful and you start to shake and you lose your balance and you're liable to fall over because you're not too coordinated when you're full of fear. So if you're fearless, you can walk right up to the edge of that cliff and not fall off. You see?
Good, Tom. Hey, Tom. So when you have your system, you've modeled this system. This is your cosmology, right? We talk about cosmologies on this show. This is your cosmology. Have you do you consider it possible that you could have another cosmology that's equally worked out, and could you entertain two cosmologies? You seem totally bought into this cosmology, which is fine, but could you entertain another cosmology that would maybe be totally different.
Absolutely. I am not bought into mine. I believe that you should believe nothing and be skeptical of everything. And the person you should be most skeptical of is yourself. So it's not mine. It's just a theory. And I have been looking for conflicts with it, or other ways of saying it better, or other ways that are more efficient to say the same thing. I am completely open to different theories and different ways of doing it. And this theory will no doubt change. As more information comes, there'll be parts of it that people will see and say, well, that didn't work out with new information and it needs to change.
So who do you consider your precursors? Who are your precursors? Who do you consider your philosophical precursors?
If you don't mind me interrupting, like, I would love to hear Tom's answers, but I been studying science and philosophy criticism for quite some time, and large ones are like, if you don't mind me interrupting, Tom.
No, go ahead. This is a free for all conversation. I don't have to monopolize.
You got like Kant, you've got Hume, you've got like basically the major European tradition in terms of like ethical, but also like involved with like how does consciousness work, philosophy. You also got like William James in the United States and things like that. So I kind
anything out of the box or just the same old stuff, Elliot?
No, I think actually Tom is offering something extremely unique, which is why I've been like following his material for 10 years, and I'll like leave it at that.
Yeah, I would say philosophically, you know, if you reduce most of the cosmology philosophy down to the age-old argument that took place back in Greece in 500 BC, and that is the idealists versus the realists. And most of those ones that Elliot just mentioned, like Kant, he was in the idealist camp. And the idealists said that reality was, that what we see as physical reality was not really fundamental. There was something more fundamental behind that. Those are the idealists. The realist says that what you see is exactly what's there. Those were the materialists. And Plato, with his allegory of the cave, was doing that. It was the same thing. So this concept falls in with the idealist, but there is no philosophy like this that I picked up and built on. It's not there. The concept of virtual reality is relatively new. It's a new idea. Had virtual reality been around in the 1920s, Einstein and Bohr and Schrodinger and the rest of them would have jumped right on it. They would have seen the connection.
Actually,
but it wasn't.
Tom, a lot of the early virtual reality people pointed to the allegory of the cave as being a virtual reality thing. In terms of virtual reality, are you familiar with Brenda Laurel or any of those people? They were earlier philosophers or earlier thinkers of virtual reality in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. Well, if you look for my kind of intellectual roots and where all this stuff comes from, you're not going to find much, because those roots don't run very deep. Basically, I'm a physicist who was able to debug code with my mind. I ran into Bob Monroe. I started out of body. I did my own research, came to my own conclusions, eventually wrote my books. And at the end of the books, I decided that after I wrote it all down, I'd go look and see if there was anybody else in the world that agreed with me. Then I did my research after it was written and started to look up and see, did anybody else have any ideas like this? I found a couple of other physicists who thought virtual reality was a good idea. I didn't find much. And who were they? One of them, probably the most renowned one, is Edward Fredkin. Edward Fredkin was an MIT guy, then went to Boston University, and he is the founder of a movement in physics called digital physics. But
Fredkin wrote the best book. Fredkin wrote the best paper.
Yeah. So anyway, I saw a couple of those, and then I found out that there was this argument between idealists and realists, back in Plato's cave, and all of that stuff came out. But that was after I wrote the books, and and basically published the books because this was my own experience. Those books are my, it's kind of my research. It's the results and conclusions of my own research in consciousness and in the physical world and some theory. So I don't really build off of anybody. And I know that there's a lot of people that, I have people come to me all the time and they say, Tom, are you a Zen Buddhist? Because what you're saying is just like Zen Buddhism. Tom, are you a Kabbalist? Because I've been studying Kabbalah for 10 years and you sound exactly like a Kabbalist. Tom, are you like the Native American shaman or something? What you're saying fits in perfectly with that. And indeed, it fits in with almost everything is a piece of that. And it all makes sense because I can explain why all that is rational and why
Tom,
it makes sense.
Let Nadi hop in.
Oh yeah. Well, I was just going to wait till there was a pause point. That seems like such confirmation to me, Tom. That little bits fit. Everybody can relate, and it all makes sense in every explanation. And and Steve, okay, I want to go back to the grizzly bears for a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Steve, Riz Verk's work too. He's so great on VR. He's a really fun guy to look into. But with the grizzly. So something about I just don't have this worked out. But the grizzly. So what if I want to go into the forest? What if there's these esoteric practices, right, where you can, like if you go into the Akash, you can choose different timelines or realities, right? So if we're talking about probabilities, part of us either knows that there's grizzlies that would come after you in the forest. We know that, but there's also the probability. And then what control do we have over choosing perhaps, or like actually creating a safe passage through the woods where there's no grizzly bears? Like where is our intervention in a consciousness that says, oh, there's grizzlies, don't go there. It's not fear, it's not belief, but where's the
we can modify the future. We can modify future probability. Our intention modifies future probability. Okay. Yeah. So if we have to walk through there because grandma called us up, she lives on the other side of the woods and she needs us, to help her find her medicine or something. So we need to go through the woods. Well, we can use our intent to modify future probability to walk through those woods and never see a grizzly bear.
Right.
Yeah.
See, we can change things that way. And that's how healing is done with the mind. You just change future probability to a more healthy state. So you can use your mind to heal other people. So that works. My point was in talking about the grizzlies is fear is never useful. Fear is always a problem. Because if you're frightened, you're not going to be very good at accessing data out of that database. And you're not going to be very good about modifying future probability because fear interrupts that intuitive process. It's only when you get rid of that fear does that intuitive process really flow. So the fear is always a problem.
The Bible says that the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. The beginning of wisdom. So there is a place for fear. I agree with Henrietta in a way. I think there's a big place for fear. I also believe that paranoia is also really, really something. And, Tom, you have this very closed system. And I don't see the fear in it. I don't see the need for you to step outside of it. I feel like you have this. I'm a very fearful person. I'm paranoid as hell. I have to step outside of my belief system to find a way to look at it and go, what the hell is going on in there? So I just wonder, and I do appreciate you saying that it's just a model, but you have you seem very certain about it. And to me, it just comes from it seems like a over amplified game of life, the old rule-based system.
No, so, well, it is at the very base. The rule set is mostly deterministic with some randomness included in it. So that's at the very base. But at the point where we live and interact and connect with each other, it's all probability, statistics, and our intent that modifies that future probability. It's our ability to tap into these databases, which the fear, makes that difficult for us to do. So I've just never, fear to me is the opposite of love. You've got love and you've got fear. And those two are the opposite. What we're trying to do is become love and get rid of our fear. And growing up is basically a process of exiting the fear and being about love. Now,
I believe in circulation. I believe that circulating from love to fear and to many other emotions is really important. I don't see love as the utopian ideal. I don't see that as the utopian ideal. We talk about utopias on this panel a bit. And does this rule set tend towards utopia? That's a question.
Well, no, you don't end up in a utopia. And the reason for that is that there's always new coming in at the bottom, new consciousness. Consciousness is always evolving. It's not a closed system. It's an open system. Evolution is an open system. You don't know exactly where it's going. It just goes. It works on itself. The input gets fed, the output gets fed back into the input. So that's evolution. So it's just a system that is growing. Now, it can evolve or it can de-evolve. It de-evolves by becoming more fearful. It evolves by less fear. It evolves by making our choices about other. It de-evolves by making our choices about self. Fear tends to be about self. Love is about other. So that's the whole idea. Now you think about utopias and you'll notice that utopias usually, have this idea, the central idea that if everybody did this, it would work out really well and everybody could be happy together. That would be utopia. And it's not the idea that's the problem. The reason utopias fail is because they don't have perfect people in them. They fail because the people in them are full of fear and ego and belief. And eventually they come unglued because the idea that is kind of dominant by the leaders who have that idea, eventually as time goes by, the fear and the ego and the belief, which is just the way we are, we're not in graduate school. We're in elementary school as far as growing up goes. And we're all full of fear and ego and beliefs. That's just the way we are. And that exerts itself. And it's because of that fear that utopia is basically impossible now, because we're not grown up enough to just be positive with each other. We start getting jealous of each other. We want what each other has. We want things that other people want, and then we have to fight for it. And it just all falls apart because of our fear, which creates the ego, which creates the beliefs. And you take any system, take any social system, it doesn't matter, communist, socialist, capitalism, anything else you can think of, all of those are utopian systems. If you take any one of those and populate it with grown-up people of high quality of consciousness, it will morph into something that's good for everybody, no matter where you start. And if you take any of those systems or anything else you come up with that you think you can legislate good behavior, it's not about behavior. It's about the person. It's not about acting kind. It's about being kind. There's a difference. There's a real big difference. So when everybody is low entropy, high quality, then the people will all get along and everybody will care about everybody else. And the system is really irrelevant. The system will evolve on its own to support those people. And it doesn't matter where you start from.
I have to go, and I don't mean to interrupt, but Tom, thanks a lot for, it's always nice to talk to you, and to tell you the truth, like your philosophy and your books have made a major impact on my life, and I ended up writing a book basically about your material, and I wanted to do more. But the thing is that this is, I'll be like really brief, and I won't be like over the top, but this is not a material you can easily approach right away. You kind of have to watch like 1 or 2 lectures or read a book or 2. It's 3 books. It's 1,000 pages. But when you realize like this is a physicist that has out of body and remote viewing background and all that kind of stuff, it becomes compelling if you're interested in how we make a model of reality. And most models of reality like drop that. And Henrietta, honestly, is like one of the only persons I know who's like looked at this as much as I have. So I don't mean to jump out, but I kind of have to jump out.
Elliot.
And
Elliot.
hold on.
Oh, can I? Because I wanted to ask you something before you go. Is that okay?
Sure.
But with both you and Tom, because I wanted you to be here, I really wanted to ask Tom, because we're on this show, if you, Tom, had looked at the abduction phenomenon very much, and how it's kind of escalated in the last, 100 years, say, or even 50, with all these experiences. What's your take on it? Obviously I've got quite a good idea because you've talked about this larger consciousness system and the growth, but it does seem to be a very new kind of novelty factor.
Would you mind if I interrupt that a little bit?
Yes.
Because talking about alien abductee things is one thing, but honestly, I'd rather hear Tom talk about like, what do you do when you fall in love with somebody? Because it's almost the same situation.
Sure. I mean, if he can relate those two things, that
it's
would be
like
great.
it's like you're being abducted by someone you're in love with and you don't know what to
Totally.
do. And Tom, I met my fiance finally, so I would love to hear your. I mean, not to interrupt H, but I would love to hear what you have to. What you, because I met Pamela and everything, and I would love to hear your feedback on that.
Okay, well, with the abduction and with the falling in love, there's some similarities there, of course, but with the abduction thing, it's pretty much, Henrietta, what you have pulled together already from what I've said. It's a story, right? It's a play that has a plot and has a story, and it continues. And this happened to you this week, and next week there's the next chapter, and it becomes something that multiple people have experienced. And within those multiple people, we have a thing that's called collective consciousness. Any group that has something in common and sees themselves as part of that group, well, then they create a collective consciousness that then is kind of supportive of that group. So these things can grow and become and kind of take on a life of their own, which is probably what you're seeing. But the fundamental thing there is that it's consciousness. Now, this is from my model. I say it's consciousness. I don't mean that to be dogmatic, but if I have to put qualifiers with every verb that it's just a model, I'd be saying it's just a model every other word. So you'll have to realize that that's part of it. So it's consciousness feeding us stories, giving us, think of it like a virtual reality game, right? You go play a virtual reality game, and that virtual reality game, you have quests, you have things to do, you have things to learn, you have to understand, and you have to deal with things, and monsters come out and you have to deal with them. And you're learning all of the choices you make are important choices. When you're dreaming in your dreaming life, all the choices you make in that dream are just as much, you're growing as the choices you make here. When you're out of body, the choices you make there help you evolve or de-evolve. So we work in all realities that we interact in. We're doing the same thing. And this is just another storyline. Now it's a storyline that you wouldn't be able to have just here. It's a story like in your dreams. Things can happen in your dreams that wouldn't happen here. Suddenly in your dreams, you wake up and you're in the middle of a burning building. What do? Do you run out and save yourself, or do you go up to the next level and wake everybody else up before you try to run out and save yourself? That's a moral choice. Okay, well, it's not likely you're going to find yourself in a burning building here. That's rather dramatic and it affects a lot of people. But in a dream, you can have that experience. Well, it's the same with the abduction thing. That puts you into a situation where you have to make choices and you have to decide. And whether you make those choices and move toward fear, or whether you make those choices and move toward being positive, that's the key. And you'll find that if you listen to people who've been in the UFO business for many decades, you find that a lot of them start talking about growing up, becoming love,
Yeah.
getting rid of fear. You know,
Yes.
you realize that that's kind of a theme that's behind the lines
Yes.
with the guys that have been around a long time. It's all about us evolving and becoming more and
Yes.
growing up. You see, well, see, it's the same story. That's
You know,
the same.
Tom, one of the things. Go ahead,
hold
Elliot.
on. I'm sorry, Steve. If I may interrupt, like I basically believe Tom. I mean, I don't want to say I believe Tom's model, but Tom's model seems like the most coherent model out there, and especially because it has this like wonderful explanation for the paranormal and psi phenomenon and all that kind of stuff. But I was like really intrigued when I remember it was one of your talks, and you were like, maybe we don't need a universe filled with like conscious entities. Maybe we need one planet, and perhaps that planet is inundated with psi phenomenon or religious phenomenon in terms of like maybe UFOs or Buddha or what have you. And that actually made a lot of sense to me, because like now I don't even think like the UFO knots are real. I think there's something that kind of injects novelty and curiosity into the human situation.
Yeah, you'll also notice that, you know, people who are open to things get more and more of it. You know,
Yes.
if you're open to, say, your dreams, and you keep a dream journal and so on, you'll suddenly have more dreams, and they'll be richer dreams. If you're open to UFOs and that sort of thing, and you follow that, and you study that, well, you're going to start having UFO experiences because you're open to that. In other words, the system says, this is something you're interested in. This is a channel by which I can connect with you and help you
Right.
grow. You
Okay,
see?
Tom, but openness comes sometimes more from fear and paranoia than love. When you're afraid your belief system, your cosmology breaks down, you no longer think rationally, which is what we talk about on this panel too. The idea of rationality being a sort of model that maybe we need to break out of, this Cartesian thing that's been foisted on us, this science thing that's been foisted on us.
Mhm.
So paranoia, you know, goes back to Pan, and Pan, the great god Pan, goes into panic and goes into when you're in a. What are you doing there, Elliot? We don't need hand signs. Don't need hand signs.
I'm just having fun. I've got to go, but before
All right, Elliot, hey, see you later. Then we'll shut up and let you say goodbye.
I know I gotta go, but I gotta tell you, Tom, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to be in your presence. I really think that you've made the after reading things like Thomas Kuhn and Goodell and everything like that, it's like I actually really think that you've got the model. So I'm very impressed.
Yeah. Well, don't believe it.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I am impressed.
Yeah.
And I'll see you guys later. And
Thank you, Elliot.
Okay.
Best to you all.
Yeah. See you later, Elliot.
Yeah. Thank you, Elliot.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, we don't want to keep you for, you know, we've been on for a couple of hours, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you about these things, because it's really, it's brought something very new to this show, you know, because your background as a physicist and the way that you've been studying consciousness. It certainly sort of opened a whole new realm for me. I mean, I've looked at your work already, but I've sort of gone a bit further today in terms of thinking about what's actually happening, should we say, in terms of everything. Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the things I say, and that I repeat very often in my books and in my talks, is that, you know, believe nothing, stay open-minded, and stay skeptical always. And if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So, you know, I don't want anybody to believe this model, because believing it isn't useful. If you believe it, now you're just, you know, you're taking on somebody else's experience for your own.
Totally.
And you can't do that. So the thing is, you always need to be skeptical of everything.
Yes.
And you have to go find that experience.
Right. I
Because if
say,
you-
Tom, I tell people, don't drink anybody else's Kool-Aid, make your own.
Yes,
Exactly.
totally. No,
Exactly.
but I like it when somebody else's Kool-Aid is, you know, it's attracting you and you
Sure.
then go explore it for yourself.
Fun. Yeah.
Right? It's fun. And then you can, yeah, I mean, that's the way to experiment.
And Tom, before you go, Kyle, if I can jump in, and I'll let, sorry, Nadia, if I'm, Tom, give us a word on fun and how it fits into your system.
Yes,
Fun.
fun and joy. Fun and joy.
Fun
Make it
is
fun.
important.
Make it fun.
Growing up should be fun. You know,
Yes.
this life, when we take it all too seriously, that's because we're wrapped up around our own egos and our own fear and our own beliefs. We need to let it open our hands, let those beliefs go away, let the fears go away and have fun. This is a journey. When you're in this journey, it's not that you should be trying to make choices that arranges your life the way you want it. That's the wrong emphasis. You need to just be you, to accept what comes and deal with it in a positive way. You don't have to say, well, I'm going to be this way so my kids will grow up and become doctors and lawyers, and I won't be this, and I'm going to do that. And we all tend to be trying to organize life to suit us. And that's the wrong approach. We need to just accept life, because life is fun, and accept the challenges that come to us and see them all as challenges. Okay, this is a challenge. This is going to be hard. I just had a death in the family. Maybe a child dies, or your husband or wife dies or something. And instead of, okay, you can grieve for a little while, but you have to see it as a challenge. How are you going to deal with this positively? You see, not with fear, not with feeling sorry for yourself, but it has to be fun. It has to be enjoyable.
Nadi, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, see that there's my work, the fun part, right? I just take it all so fucking seriously. But this has been really great, Tom. I'm gonna have to step out at the top of the hour, but what I love is the paradox, right? Where you don't want to believe, you don't want to buy in and just accept the whole theory, and yet I think the proof of a good theory would be that it doesn't want you to do that. So it's really lovely. It's just like everything becomes a little bit more evidence of like why it's tasty and good and fits all these different, boxes. So it's been great. I agree with Henrietta. I've just like, there's been a little more of a step in my expansion, and I'm grateful for the work that you've done and how you've put it together, and just to have time with you. It's been great. And both of you, Steve and Henrietta, and Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Nadi. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Henrietta.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Nice
And
meeting you, Tom.
particularly thank you, Tom, for
I've had fun
being
too.
with us tonight.
It's been enjoyable. Thank you guys for inviting me, and I'm glad to be a little part of what you're doing.
Come back someday, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, do come back and have a dialogue with someone else who's got a very different, approach.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Well, I guess we'll leave. It's thanks, Nadia. Thanks, Henrietta. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
And thanks for ending on the note of fun. I think that's a good note to end on.
Fun, yeah. Well, life, joy. When you get rid of that fear and ego, what's left is satisfaction and joy. That's what it's all about.
I made that choice today when I was really kind of, really bent out of shape about something. I thought, wait, let me just look at it as a fun challenge.
Yeah.
With a lot of choices. Masses.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.